Keisha Greaves is the founder of Girls Chronically Rock and has always been passionate about fashion. Born and raised in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Keisha has a bachelor's degree in fashion design and merchandising and a master's of business administration. At the age of 24, she was diagnosed with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, and her life changed. But she would not be bogged down by it. Keisha decided not only to embrace muscular dystrophy and other chronic illnesses, but started giving her dream of starting a fashion line the full vision and time it needed. Today, Keisha is a motivational speaker who talks about spreading awareness of muscular dystrophy, balancing life with chronic illnesses, raising money for causes, advocating for disability, and other topics. Keisha's busy, booked and busy. Keisha's been featured in a number of media outlets like Good Morning America, The Today Show, ABC News, and more. One of her proudest moments was when she was featured in Today Style Heroes 2018. She's been featured with other celebrities like Gabrielle Union, Drew Barrymore, Deborah Messing, Millie Callick, and more for her inspired clothing line. Keisha has also been the Massachusetts State Ambassador for the Muscular Dystrophy Association for 2 years. She's worked with Massachusetts' Governor Charlie Baker and successfully got September 30th officially proclaimed as Limb-Girdle Muscular Dystrophy Awareness Day. Further, she also received a proclamation from Mayor Mark McGovern from the city of Cambridge. And without further ado, we want to give a great round of applause and welcome. And we're hugely grateful for you joining us, Keisha. And so we're just going to be in conversation like two girlfriends who care about folks and who are working for justice. And so, Keisha, just starting kind of with like the most, the first question of any interview. Tell us about yourself. How did you get here? How did you get to starting Girls Chronically Rock? And then we can go a little more in granular detail about your story, but I know you're an amazing storyteller. And so please grace us with your introduction.
Sure. Well, hello, Ray, and thank you so much for that marvelous introduction. I appreciate that. I'm happy to be here. So yes, my name is Keisha Greaves, and I'm the CEO and founder of Girls Chronically Rock clothing brand. I started that in around 2017 because I wanted to help create and inspire and motivate others in the disability community like myself.
Awesome. Well, Keisha, you've done so much work in such a short time frame. And I would like to say, some people, it takes them decades, their whole life to get a clothing line off of the ground. And so I'd like to just ask you, how did you develop your passion for fashion? And what was your journey like to become a fashion designer and visual merchandiser?
Sure. So I always tell people I always had a passion for fashion. Growing up, I knew I always wanted to be a fashion designer. I told my mom, my dad, I'm going to school for fashion. I'm going to school for fashion. But my mom actually wanted me to go to school with something like in the hospital, something health related, or she wanted me to go to school for computer science. And I'm like, no, I want to go to fashion. So when I looked up growing up, I looked up to designers such as Kimora Lee Simmons from her Baby Fat era. Baby Fat all throughout high school. And then Betsy Johnson, I love her for her quirkiness, her colorfulness. I'm hoping one day she'll collaborate with me on a collection. And then I also love Tommy Hilfiger. And so those three designers, I would still love to work with them today, but they just always inspired me with their colorfulness, their uniqueness. And so I always knew I wanted to be a fashion designer, going to stores, even looking at the mannequins. I'm like, oh, I want to dress that mannequin and things like that. And now my office alone here, I have about 3 mannequins here. And so how that journey is, I was like, I want to go to school for fashion design. So I kind of looked up at different schools of where studies fashion design. And of course, me being a chicken, I didn't want to go too far away from my mom. So I ended up going at Framingham State University. And that's where I received my bachelor's in fashion design and merchandising.
Awesome. And then you also took a pivot and you got an MBA. And so what was it like pursuing an MBA after fashion school and then being in graduate school and just the brevity of everything that comes with graduate studies? What was your pivot? You were like, oh, I need to learn the business side of fashion now. And so what was your graduate experience like?
Yeah. So after I finished Framingham State University in 2007, I did take about a year off. So I didn't go right after, But I started working in like retail, like Eldo Shoes, Vera Bradley, getting that side, which is so hard working in stores that you love, because all my money went towards the stores. And so I started, kind of just getting that field and, getting that field of merchandising, of being in the retail stores, dealing with customers. And then from there on, I was like, you know what? I do want to get the business side of things. This would, actually help me build my business. Cause like I said, I knew I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, fashion designer. And I was like, eventually would like to work for myself. So I wanted to get the business side of things. So I was like, you know what? Let me go now while I'm still young before life passes you by. Cause life definitely does. And so I was like, let me go now. So then I just kind of looked up. I wasn't planning on going anywhere far. So I just applied to out here in the city of Cambridge where I live, Cambridge College, and then that's when I started getting my master's degree. And I'm glad I did it when I did, looking back of, because you never know, life unexpectedly takes a turn. And I'm just glad that I got that out the way, and I'm proud to have, my master's, because I felt like I learned a lot of, how to run my business now.
Awesome. Well, I definitely think that's really aspirational and significant, and definitely do things as soon as possible as certain life things, because I definitely know life will get in the way. And speaking just graduate school being a life-changing experience, you started experiencing symptoms and going to doctor's appointments, and then one day at 24 you got diagnosis from your neurologist while you were in graduate school. So what was that journey like with your muscular dystrophy um, diagnosis you were in your mid to early 20s?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a challenge. Here I was in my early 20s, like you said. I mean, I'm in graduate school, but still hanging out with friends, going to parties, doing what 20-year-olds will do. So yes, it was at a time when I was in graduate school, driving, doing everything, like, not really seeing any symptoms early on, but I noticed I kept on falling. I would repeatedly fall. So I just kind of brushed it off. I just thought, I need to lose weight, no big deal. Like, not really thinking anything of it. But what really stood out was one day I was in the kitchen with my mom, and I kind of lifted up my right arm to kind of reach something from the cabinet. And I noticed the arm wouldn't extend out as it should. So I thought that was kind of weird. And then another instance, when me, my mom, and sister were at the supermarket, we're leaving. I'm pushing the cart. We're about to put in the bags in the car, and then boom, my leg totally gives out on me. And when my leg gives out, it wasn't like I got like a notice. It just kind of like buckled, and I went to the floor. So it wasn't like I could catch myself. And when I did fall, it was like I was a dead weight. I wasn't like say, oh, let me brush myself off. I fell. I couldn't get myself back up. And my mom and sister couldn't even get me up as well. So I remember a strong man came over. He was like, do you need some help? And that's how I got up off the floor. And then from there, my mom and sister were like, you know what? I think something like you've been falling a lot, like something's not right. Maybe let's go see it. And I'm like, whatever, la di da. So my mom was like, let me go to Tufts, because that's where she sees all her doctors. So I go to Tufts Medical out here in Boston, and I go see an orthopedic, because at the time we're just honestly thinking it's something in the feet. And then from there, I go to the examination room. Two doctors come in. They're like, Keisha, raise your right leg. And the right leg would not extend out as it should. And like that was the first time I noticed that. Same thing with the left. Both doctors, I always remember this to this day. They just looked at each other like puzzled, like they'd never seen it. So I'm like, why are they looking like that? What's the big deal? I thought they were just gonna tell me I need to lose weight. So from then on, they was like, you know what? I think you need to see a neurologist. It seems something more neuromuscular. So I'm like, okay, still not really thinking anything of it. So then I go to where my primary care doctor is, Mount Auburn, out here in Cambridge. I see the neurologist, Dr. Catherine Wang. I still see her to this day. And when I go see her, we go straight to it. She's like, we're going to give you an EKG, EMG, MRI, all these tests I've honestly never even heard of. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But the most interesting of all was the muscle biopsy, where they took a piece of muscle from out of my right leg, and I was wide awake for that.
Oh,
So that
wow.
was interesting. But the weird thing about me is a part of me wanted to kind of touch the muscle. So to this day, I'm like, I should have just asked. But that was an interesting day. And I remember I go in there walking, and I remember leaving there with crutches because the biopsy was kind of painful. And I remember I had class that night, but I couldn't attend. And then it was that moment. I'm like, I have to tell my professor, my classmates, what's going on. Because if they just took a muscle biopsy from me, what is this? What's going on? So I was totally just like in shock, but still thinking not anything of it. So I always remember the neurologist, she called me one day and she said, Keisha, we got your test results. She was like, you have been diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. I said, what? Because I never heard of it. Muscular
Right.
dystrophy, I feel like, is not really that much talked about. I said, she had to call the wrong patient. She's not talking about me. Nobody in my family seemed to have it. I never heard of it. And I was like, no way. But I knew deep down, like there had to be some truth to it. And then, like most of us, I go run into Google and I start searching muscular dystrophy, which is not always great. So as I'm researching that, it's saying no cure, no treatment. People start to decline after their 40s. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This can't be me. She called the wrong patient. So I totally start to shut down from there on out. I didn't tell any family and friends. And I'm just like, what is happening? What does my future hold?
Wow. That's a really powerful testimony. And thanks so much for sharing that. And I can imagine that could have been a very jarring experience, and you had to really process before you could tell anyone else. Because I think
Yep.
sometimes we're like, oh, we want to tell somebody immediately, but then also we have to like say, well, I have to process this. I have to be able to shape my story and do it
Yeah.
on my own, and then seek care. And so, I mean, you've definitely talked about the impact it's had on you, but at some point there was a pivot and you were like, I'm going to turn my pain into purpose. And so, can you talk about how you decided to turn your pain into purpose and start Girls Chronically Rock? And yeah, and then we'll start talking about adaptive wear and all that.
Well, first of all, I love that line, pain to purpose. I might have to bite that. So thank you. I love it. So yeah, I mean, it definitely took some time. Again, here I was in my early 20s. I just started graduate school, and the doctor's telling me I have muscular dystrophy. I'm like, no way. So of course I'm not telling family and friends. When friends started wanting me to go out, I'm like, no, making up excuses. The only reason my cousins knew was because my mom, would tell her sisters, my aunties. So that's how they know. But I'm just like, muscular dystrophy, what is going on? And so one day my friend mentioned, he was like, why don't you write a blog? Share your story about what's going on. And I'm like, no way. Why would I do that? I don't have muscular dystrophy. So it took like for me, so then I just started opening my laptop that day. And then I just started typing, sharing, like just how I am with you now about the symptoms, this testing. And it was like at that moment, as I'm typing, saying it out loud, I'm like, I have muscular dystrophy. That's crazy. It was like, never mind what the doctors were saying. It took that moment as I'm like typing it and saying it out loud. I'm like, I have muscular dystrophy. That's crazy. So I remember I posted it like on Tumblr, Facebook, and then I remember I just got such great feedback. They're like, "Oh my God, Keisha, I had no idea." Because at the time too, it was like when you saw me, you really couldn't really tell. I wasn't using a wheelchair then. I was still driving. So they're like, "Oh wow, I just saw you. Like I had no idea." And that's just to show, like I always say now, like you never know what someone's dealing with. And so I'm like, yeah, I had it. And then some people was like, oh, I know somebody that has that. And then just kind of sharing their stories. And then from then I kind of started connecting with other individuals on Instagram. And I would use like hashtag muscular dystrophy, hashtag disability awareness. Cause I'm like, it's nothing like talking to somebody who knows and gets it, knows what you're going through on an everyday basis. Yes, I may get the support and family and friends, but I'm like, there has to be others out there like me. So I remember just reading, like seeing other people that had muscular dystrophy and other Black girls out there. And I was like, oh, yeah, she's doing her thing. And, content creators. And I was like, look at them. And that just kind of motivated me and inspired me like, wow, look at them, they're striving, they're dealing with their disability. I can do this. So it was just kind of nice to have that connection and that supportive community. And then I just started like joining like different support groups and things like that because like they get it. And so from then I was like, you know what, it's time to stop putting my fashion degree to use, because I was kind of like at a denial at some point, thinking the doctor was going to call and say, okay, sure, we got your test results mixed up, but that wasn't the case. And so I was like, I'm a true believer in things do happen for a reason. I may not have understood why then, and sometimes I may question now, but I'm like, it's time, to start putting my fashion skills and knowledge to use with kind of, pivoting that and motivating and inspiring others in the disability community. And then now creating, well, I call hacking also my clothes with kind of creating that adaptive, accessible clothing for people with disabilities. Because I felt like there's so much things I felt like I took for granted as an able body of just running up the stairs in college with my groceries, laundry, high school. I'm going to certain locations and, not even noticing if it has an accessible button to open the door. Whereas now, that's such a big thing. And I'm like, wow, like it just totally opened not just my eyes, but my close friends around me, my aides and family. Because I'm just like, look at all this stuff we took for granted. And so I'm just like, now I use that moment, not just Girls Chronically Rock for clothing, but also to be an advocate. And I'm so like a huge advocate now for disabilities. Just at like going to the hospitals and not having the Hoyer lift to transfer me to the bed. I'm just like, this is crazy. So it's like I feel like my mouth now like is just like I just have to say whatever. And I'm glad now I can help others with using their voice and advocating, for people in the disability community and for themselves. Because it's like if we don't speak up and say anything, nothing is going to get done. But so from then on, I was like, it's time to put my fashion degree to use. And that's when I kind of pivot and then I built Girls Chronically Rock. But I tell people, I'm like, I still have my days. Yes, you may see me smiling and laughing, but I still have my days. I'm a person, I have like OCD. I'm a neat freak. I like things a particular way. I'm a Virgo. And I have to rely on aides now to help me out the bed, help me get dressed, help me shower. That sucks. Sometimes I'm like, I just want time to myself. Sometimes I honestly would go to bed like just like a few nights ago when I was just crying. And like I was telling you earlier, TikTok definitely makes me laugh. So just things like that. Like I could be down, but going to watch like a funny video or watch somebody else, like myself doing something positive. I'm like, oh wow, that's dope. So it's like I take each day at a time. But like I tell people, I'm like, don't get it twisted. I still have my days too.
Oh, absolutely. And you've definitely talked about so much about humanity in general. Like we all have our days, no matter how well we may seem on the outside, everybody has some sort of struggle they're going with. And so we all have to be mindful of that. But something that I really found that was really inspiring was how you talked about how you started building community. You decided to post on Tumblr, to make a blog post, and you were able to build community and join community with folks. And I think there's so much healing in community. And I think that healing is not a singular sport. You got to do different forms of
Yeah.
in order to get well, and there is no final destination to getting well
Mhm.
for any sort of illness or ailment. And so thanks so much for uplifting that. And then also I kind of want to, I mean, something you talked about before we get into like kind of like the adaptive piece, because every
Yes.
more fashion terminology I can learn from you about and the history of it and all that stuff. You talked about ableism and how so often we take things for granted and that we have to be intentional about making sure we have accessible spaces. And so I think that's something that I definitely want to come back to as we talk a little bit
Mhm.
more about adaptive wear and fashion, but definitely lifting up like what does it look like? I want the audience to think about what does it look like to be an ally or co-conspirator to make sure we have more accessible spaces in a variety of contexts. And so thanks so much for uplifting that. I was like, let me make sure I bring that up before we move on so we can come back.
Yes.
But as a part of you developing Girls Chronically Rock, I saw some of your designs and just kind of like your iterative process, like you were iterating, and you were doing the research. And so I'd love for you to give us a peek behind the scenes of what was it like building your brand and what kind of research and methodologies did you use to really say, well, this is what I want to make. This is the like the way we want to pursue our lines, and this is how we want to do a swim line or do more active wear or do other pieces. And so love to get a peek behind the curtain of what it's like to design a line.
Oh yeah, well sure. So yeah, I like to always to give a like little reason of how Girls Chronically Rock, how I came up with the name. Because after, coming out of denial a little bit, I was like, you know what, let me create something. And I knew I wanted something with the word chronic in it, but I didn't know how I wanted to incorporate that. So I honestly was lying in bed one night. That's when honestly a lot of my ideas, creative ideas, I tell people come to me when I'm sleeping in bed at night. And then I wake up and it's like, voila, and so I just was like lying in bed one night and I thought Girls Chronically Rock. And it just kind of like just came to me. And I love the way it sounded. It sounded empowering. And I was like, I like that. So from that day, when I discovered the name, I kind of just started selling on Etsy at first. And how I started off with first selling t-shirts is because I love wearing t-shirts. I have on my t-shirt right now. I just love wearing like different graphic t-shirts with like different inspirational sayings. So I just wanted to express that through the first t-shirt line of how I felt like I was going through my journey of being diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. Like I had t-shirts like, hello, my name is chronically ill badass. Like, hello, yes, you're chronically ill, we have a disability, but you're still striving and doing what you have to do. Trust your dopeness, trust and believe in yourself. And so from then on, I was like, you know what? People don't know the struggle of what it's like getting dressed on a daily basis, having a disability. And that's even before I had AIDS. Coming out from the shower, I felt like I just finished running the Boston Marathon. Just to put on a t-shirt, it was like I had to take a pause to like, take a breath. So I was like, oh Lord, I was like, oh no. So then that's when, I learned about adaptive fashion. And I'm like, wow, like that's so like I can do that with just the clothes I have here, where just kind of hack them and make them more adaptive. And when I say adaptive, meaning like say my t-shirt, I had created some with like magnetic snaps on the shoulder where it was easier to open to give it that leisure way when putting it over my head. Another one that I love is like a t-shirt, the back I put snaps on the back of my t-shirt so that way I can easily put my arms in the front. I don't have to struggle, me and my aides, putting it over my head. And then voila, it's so much easier. And I'm like, why wasn't this taught in school? I was like, in school, like we didn't know anything about adaptive fashion. And again, I also didn't have a disability then. So I'm not thinking about those things. So now I just like opened my whole new world and I'm like, this needs to be happening also in schools, adaptive fashion. So from then on, I was like, you know what? I want to create adaptive t-shirts. So I reached out to a manufacturer in Canada, and that's when he actually produced my Girls Chronically Rock t-shirts, and those have the Velcro coming down on the left-hand side. So it's easily to like rip off and off, which I love because now when I do fashion shows, I have like a model, like well, it's been like a guy model at the end of the show. I kind of like have him rip off the shirt because I want people to see like, okay, this is adaptive. It comes off, it can easily Velcro on and off. And then from there, I wanted to create a swimwear line. And the importance of why I created the swimwear line, people may think like, oh yeah, well that's just seasonal for when you're going on vacation or going to the pool. And I'm like, no, not really, because someone like myself going to living with a disability prior to the pandemic, I was going to aquatic therapy twice a week at Spalding out here where I live. And I told people, I'm like, when I was in the water, I felt like a mermaid because I can do things in the water that I can't do on land because the gravity. So I'm there hopping and around, like doing things that I would be unable to do on land. So they say that is like the best exercise. So I tell people, I'm like, imagine for an able-bodied person, you coming out from the pool and how that bathing suit just sticks to you, forest ladies. So I was like, imagine someone like myself hanging on for dear life on my wheelchair for my balance, getting off from the lift to get in and out the pool. I was like, that's a lot. So I was like, I want to create something more accessible. So with my adaptive swimwear, I created it so with like the hooks on the shoulder to make it easier to snap on and off because I'm like, this will make it so much easier, not just for myself, but for others, and maybe that would motivate them to want to do aquatic therapy. Because, like I said, in the water, I felt like a mermaid. So then that's when I created the Adaptive Splash swimwear line for Girls Chronically Rock. So from then on, though, there's so much more I want to do. Like, I love wearing hoodies and, just going to a doctor's appointment. I want to like get an adaptive hoodie with a zipper, comes from the hoodie all the way down, just so I can like put on to go to a doctor's appointment. So there's so much more I want to do with the Girls Chronically Rock adaptive clothing and so many designers I want to work with. And shout out to Tommy Hilfiger, who I looked up to now has an adaptive clothing line. So that just warmed my heart that when he came up with that, because I'm like, oh, and I was like, hopefully he'll want to work with me soon. But and for instance, I've been trying to get Rihanna's attention. I call her my cousin because my family's from Barbados, but she doesn't know we're related yet, but I would love to get her attention because I buy so much Savage Fenty with her onesies, and I'm like, her onesies, this would be so amazing if this was adaptive. So I'm like, come on, Riri. So there's like so many designers I want to get involved in retailers, but I'm not stopping and I'm gonna keep on going with this adaptive fashion because I'm glad more designers are getting more known to it, more retailers. So I'm like, it's not gonna stop here. Adaptive fashion can be for everybody, all inclusive.
Oh, you are absolutely right. And I said, um, you believe it, you can achieve it, and you can manifest it. So I'm putting it in the universe for you too to talk to
Thank
Tommy,
you.
and if there's
Yeah.
anything that we to amplify your work. We'll be sharing your work far and wide, and even the desires of your heart, and sharing your brand. And so I believe it will happen, and we'll put it
Thank
out there in the
you.
universe. You actually answered one of my questions. And so um, I imagine, I mean, you've already had some really great responses from the fashion community. And so what has been the response from the disability rights and body positivity community about GCR and how you're making fashion more accessible and adaptive for folks?
Yeah, I mean, it's been great. I know, because like I tell people, sometimes I could doubt myself, when I'm having my days, like, are people understanding my mission? Do they know what Girls Chronically Rock means? And then what really touches me is when I may get a message like on my Instagram or Facebook. It's like, hey Keisha, like, I love your line. I just bought one of your shirts for my mom, and I love what you're doing with the adaptive clothing. And that just warms my heart, because I'm like, oh, like, you know who I am? Like, that's just like the littlest things like that people don't understand. And something over the summer that really, really touched my heart was, there was something, they had like an open runway. And so I participated in that. And then I had like some of my friends with a disability, rock my adaptive wear down the runway. It was downtown here in Boston. And, just doing the fashion show, not thinking, not really noticing like who's out there. And then I come home, and then I got a message from this lady. And she's like, hi, how are you? I seen you downtown. And she was like, I love what you're doing. I just bought one of your adaptive t-shirts, because she was like, I do chemo every day. And she was like, that shirt is going to be so amazing. And that just brought tears to my eyes. Because I'm like, look at that. Like, I'm not like, like you just at the show, like, you never know who's watching. You never know who's going to be out there. You never know whose life you could be changing. And, cancer definitely runs in my family. So I'm like, oh my goodness. So I was like, oh my God, like, no way. So, and then she said, and I was like, when the t shirt comes, make sure you take a picture of it. And then she did. She was like, actually, she took a picture of her at chemo. And she said even the nurses loved it, because they was easily able to zip it down for her to get to her port. And I was just like, so little things like that just made my day. And even to this day, I still go back and look at her picture in the gallery, like, look at that. Like, and I was just participating in the show real quick, coming home, and then not expecting that. Like, you never know who's watching. So things like that definitely keep me motivated and inspired, because I'm like, oh, like, let me keep going, Keisha. You got this.
Oh, absolutely. You're definitely making an impact on the world. And you're absolutely right. You never know who's watching, and you never know who's speaking your names in rooms you aren't in. And so
Yeah.
doing it. And so I mean, before we pivot the conversation to some more of your activism work, what's on the horizon for GCR? I know you talked about a few things you want to do, but what do you plan on doing in the next year to 3 years with GCR and expanding your fashion line?
Yeah, well, this year I had some exciting earlier September. I actually GCR was at New York Fashion Week. So that was exciting. That was one of my goals. So, and I just love New York. I always get so much inspiration from there. So that was like one of those moments where like I was so nervous going there, like, making sure everything goes well. I pack everything correctly. And so it was like after the second show, I was just like one of those moments. I'm like, wow, I just finished New York Fashion Week. So that was a nice memorable moment. Awesome pictures. And I actually got my friend that has a disability that lives in New York to model on the runway, because I'm like, this is the representation, that we need to start seeing on the runway. So that was amazing. So from then, I would like to hopefully in the next few years do more fashion shows. I would love to do LA Fashion Week. I would love to do like London Fashion Week. But my ultimate goal, I would love to get GCR in retail stores like Kohl's, Target, hopefully collaborate with Tommy Hilfiger, hopefully get the attention of Rihanna at Savage Fancy. So, there's just so much more, I want to do. And as I mentioned earlier, of kind of getting that adaptive fashion taught in these schools, because I think that's where it needs to begin, because like I said, when I was in school, it wasn't taught, so I think it's so important to get that into these universities. So that's something I am trying to incorporate, with my nonprofit, the GCR Adaptive Project, with getting that into, schools like FIT, schools out here in Massachusetts, any school that has a fashion program. I want them to start creating adaptive fashion, because it's popping.
Absolutely. And that could totally be a whole specialization. And I believe you'd be
Yeah.
a professor and author and all of the things. And so you're definitely a visionary. And so I'm excited to see how
Thank
you
you.
evolve. And just to pivot a little bit, I mean, you've been doing, I mean, I feel like the work that you're doing is all about body positivity, and it's all about representation and accessibility. And so, what was your advocacy like prior to your diagnosis? Do you feel like your diagnosis turned you into an advocate, or do you feel like you had always kind of kept your pulse on like knowing what was going on, but this really propelled you into a specific advocacy lane?
I would say definitely after I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, I became more of an advocate. And it definitely took some time because yes, I was like more of like a shy, girl in school, but still like, had my chatting box, you know what I mean, and classmates and things like that. But definitely when I was first diagnosed, of course, that took time to even advocate for anything because I needed to first acknowledge that I had muscular dystrophy. So from then I'm like, I need to start advocating where it's just like the littlest things of like I had an employer in the past where, where I was using my cane, still doing merchandising, and I asked for reasonable accommodations, and they told me no. I
Mm-hmm.
actually had to file a MCAD, a Massachusetts discrimination case against them out here in Massachusetts. But like that was like I feel like the turning point for me because I'm like, no, you know what I mean? Like for instance, like even climbing up a ladder became difficult. Just like emptying out a box, it was like challenging, not just for like it was frustrating for me as well because I'm like, I want to be able to do these things. Like, why is this happening to me? And so from then on, I'm like, I had to be an advocate because I'm like, I can't believe this job just said no. And so from then, I think it like just honestly started from there. And then I just started like once Girls Chronically Rocks started to get more, like recognition, then I would get like, asked to speak at different like pharmaceuticals, like Rare Disease Day. I work with like Sarepta pharmaceuticals, Alexon out here in because Cambridge has so much pharmaceuticals out here alone. So I'm like, so yeah, just like speaking to them, I just definitely felt like I more heard my voice of sharing my story and I felt like more comfortable because sometimes looking back, I tell people, I'm like, if you had asked me back then, Keisha, do you see yourself being a disability advocate or speaking to different things or even chatting with you now on, Zoom about my story? I'll be like, no way. So it's so crazy to sometimes look back and it's like total like, 180. But I love it. And now I'm on the board for persons of people for disabilities out here in Cambridge. Cause I'm like, you know what I mean? I live out here in the city of Cambridge, born and raised. And I'm like, there's a lot of things that need to change, like the sidewalks, the hospitals. So it's like now, like everyone pretty much knows me. They know my mouth. I now like reach out to even like news stations about like this needs to get done because it's like I feel like if I don't speak up, nothing's going to get done. And I feel bad for others when I see like others, like say people that may have been migrated here from like a different country and they can't speak. Like that's something more I want to get involved with and me advocating for them. So I'm like, you know what I mean? This person needs a new wheelchair. This person needs to get out of this nursing home. And I had the unfortunately experience of being in a nursing home when I had a really bad fall a few years back. And that was just not a great experience there. So that's something I'm advocating for, being like having better nursing facilities. I want to open like a young adult like an apartment for people with disabilities like myself that that has a mental health therapist, a nurse on site. I'm like, why isn't this like already done? So that's something I'm like talking now to the mayor, which I feel like years back I would have never had like thought of this or advocating. So I'm just like yapping, I'm running my mouth and I am getting my voice heard. And yeah, and I'm just proud to say that I am a huge disability advocate, and I'm hoping one day I'll get invited to the White House.
Oh, you, I mean, we're gonna manifest that too. I would consider myself to be a loquacious person as also. So I'd also kind of like, I mean, you talked about some of the policies and things you're advocating for, but something that you mentioned earlier and something I actually have a personal connection with is the importance of home health aides and how they make the world go round. And so would you speak to like what a home health aide is and the importance they have in helping you day to day and just navigate?
Yeah, so home health aides, like, I tell people all the time, it's a lot, because I'm the person I like to be alone. So that was a huge transition. I tell people of just having to rely on aides. Like I have an aide here with me now, like after I get off of this Zoom call, like she would help me in the bed. So with myself, because I'm unable to stand up like how I used to and transfer, I have to use something called a Hoyer lift. where it's the machine where it kind of lifts me up in this sling. It kind of looks like one of those net things that, you see at the beach. And it's kind of, I mean, I don't mind it. I got so used to it. I'm just kind of like this swinging around, and my aides are like, "Are you okay?" But yeah, so it's like a lift that transfers me to the wheelchair to my bed, and also like in the mornings when I shower, from my bed to the shower chair to the shower. So they help me get dressed. They help me shower. They help me with certain foods I'm unable to lift my hand up to, feed myself, like a soup, for instance. That would be difficult. So they have to help me with that. Certain, like if a thing is too heavy, a bottle of soda, and I'm like, oh my God, my arms can't lift up, they have to assist with that. So they are pretty much like attached to me. And without them, I can't say get out the bed. So that's like where I tell people, I'm like, these aides sometimes, yes, they're awesome. I love them. I have a good set right now. It always wasn't like that. And that could also change because aides, like I said, I got story for days with aides. I said I was going to start a podcast called PCA Chronicles. And so, but yes, it's like, sometimes they are not always reliable. And what they don't understand is it's like, if they don't show up, I can't show up. So if an aide doesn't show up, I'm like, I can't take my medication. I can't get up and just kind of stretch out my legs. I could possibly get a pressure sore from just sitting in bed all day, which has happened. So it's like these aides are like really like a big part of my life. And I'm grateful for them because it's like, it's like my family knows who they are. Like even going to family events, like, because I need their assistance. The family doesn't know everything because they're not with me every day. The aides are. So it's like I said, they're kind of like attached to me. And so it's like I love them dearly, but sometimes I still do need my space. And, I'm just like, all right, I need a break. That's why when I go to bed at night, I just kind of feel like I like that alone time. And so, but then, it's kind of like the same routine every day. But, I'm grateful for them. I love them. They drive me crazy. I'm sure I drive them crazy. But that's the life of having the aide. And it's like, until I tell people if they don't show up, I can't show up. So it's kind of hard, even like when I'm scheduling like Zoom calls or doctor's appointments, where it's like they'll be like, "Oh, do you want to come in at 8?" Because for instance, I always was a morning person. So I always used to get my appointments like 7 because I can get up by myself and drive. Whereas like now I'm like, oh well, I can't. I have to wait. My aide doesn't usually come until like after 9. So that's something that's like I've gotten used to. But sometimes like when I say it out loud, I'm just like, this sucks. Like I want to be able to just get up like I used to and go to an early appointment. Cause like I'm just such a morning person. But until they show up, I can't show up. So that's the big deal with the PCAs, aides. I know PCAs, aka personal care attendants. I know people have so many names to me, and one calls like HHA, home health aide, but to me they're all the same. I really don't even see a difference, and I've been having them for quite some time now, since 2019. But when it's like it's kind of like a learning process for both me and the aides. I feel like we learn something each and every day, and that's the life. And now there's also like a shortage of aides. A lot of people don't know, especially out here in Massachusetts, and then the lack of pay. The starting pay for some of the aides out here is 17 an hour. I think that's crazy. I'm like, they may drive me crazy, but they do a lot for me. They use the Hoya to transfer me. They shower me. I have a suprapubic catheter where they have to empty the leg. I even now have a colostomy bag where that may need to get changed every day or so. So it's like you have to pay them more. And the thing is, yes, I wish I was rich. I wish, because I think I would love to pay them like 30 or more. That's another thing I advocate for. Like last month, I went to the State House out here in Massachusetts. I'm like, these PCAs, it was like a whole bunch of us. We went down there. I went with the PCA union because I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like, they need to get paid more. So that's something like I'm still continuing to strive for and continue to fight for. But that's why I'm hoping one day I get rich and I can just pay them what they want. But I think because of the lack of pay, that's why aides, they kind of just don't take the job seriously, if that makes sense. Whereas like some days they're like, oh, I'll go to Keisha when I want. I'll show up when I want. Or sometimes don't show up at all. Because I've had that in the past as well. So I think that's where it kind of like, it's kind of just a messed up situation where it's like we can't win. It's like because they want more money, but then it's like they can't get it. I can't pay them out the pocket. My insurance is, and then it's like nobody wants to work. And then especially after the pandemic, I think a lot of them got scared. So it's like that's the life. It sucks, but each and every day I just hope for the best.
No, I totally understand that. And I think that, I mean, I appreciate you being so candid about your experience, because I mean, there is a spectrum of care with any professional you work with. So I totally get it. And I think that something that your life and activism and even your business dealings are a prime example of intersectionality, because we don't lead single issue lives. And so the fact that you're not only fighting for disability justice, but workers' rights and economic justice and just human rights as a whole, and even civil rights. I mean, right? And
Yeah.
so much for sharing your story about your experience with your PCAs. And I mean, to some extent, I really want you to, discuss a little bit more about rare diseases and muscular dystrophy, because I mean, it's not common. I'd heard of muscular dystrophy many years ago because of maybe the Shriners or something like that. I'd been at a parade when I was young, and I asked my mom, like, what do they do? Educated me on muscular dystrophy, and I knew someone at my school. And so, what would be some information you would want our community to know about rare diseases, chronic illnesses, and how we can support and be more than just supporters just by like saying, oh, I support, but like, what are some tangible actions we can take to support folks who are experiencing these things?
Yeah, like, and I always make sure to tell people this, you never know what someone's dealing with. You never know what someone's going through. And the reason I bring that up too was because when I was first diagnosed, when I used to still drive, I used to park, the handicap placard, on the spot, because that was easier for me to walk. I was still walking with a limb. And I remember I always used to get people be like, you're too young to park there, like da 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 da. And it's like, obviously I got the sign for a reason. And I think until they saw me get out the car with my cane, then they were like, oh, or some people thought I was using the cane as a fashion statement, honestly. But you kind of never know what someone's dealing with. But the thing about a disability, I feel like what you can do to support and just acknowledge of something I mentioned earlier of going to, like, say, a building or a mall, and they don't have that accessible button to open the door. It's like, how will someone like myself in a wheelchair open the door if I don't have my aid with me? Another thing that I find bizarre is that a lot of them may have the accessible buttons and it's not working. Now, what sense does that make? And that's another project I'm working on now, where I'm going to start going around to different places to call them out, like, hello, why isn't this working? Because that's a big difference. You know what a difference that is for me to push it, opposed to, like, if that's not working and the door is so heavy. And this was even when I was standing walking. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So just like, if you see someone that maybe needs help or assistance, and I know some people in the disability community are very iffy. Me, I'm open to anything. I think I've heard, like, a lot of funny comments. Like, one time I went out to the club and this guy was like, oh, with my cane, he was like, oh, are you a pimp here in Boston? And it's like, it's like funny things like that. But and it's like, for him to say that, I'm like, that's honestly what probably people think, I have this cane for. Because of course I had like zebra print, cheetah. I didn't have no basic cane that the insurance was covering. I had to decorate mine. And so, just kind of like, you never know what someone's dealing with, but like little things like that. Or if you go to say a location and those restaurants have like those elevators and you see someone's in it and it's not used like for an actual person in a wheelchair, things like that. I think that needs to be called out, because it's like, you never know. I went to a drag brunch, I want to say over the summer with my aide. We go in, the elevator that they had there is like one of those like built-in elevators. Why did they have the DJ set up inside that elevator? They had stairs. So I come in and they kind of like look bizarre because they, again, was probably like, well, we don't have nobody here in a wheelchair that's coming. They're at home. They have no lives. And so I'm just like, the DJ had to move all her equipment to upstairs just so I can get in the elevator. Now, why was she there to begin with? And even I appreciate that the DJ was like, I tell them this all the time. She was like, this is a common thing. She was like, they always have me set up here. And I told them one day someone is going to come here in a wheelchair, and look at that. And it's like, that's ridiculous. It's like, why do you have the elevator here for? So little things like that like annoy me, but little things like that, call out the restaurant, call out the hospital, because you'll be surprised of how much many places are not accessible, not ADA compliant, and they're supposed to be. But like I said, these are things I'm still feel like I learn, and I'm still learning each and every day. And the thing I want to touch about with muscular dystrophy, there's a lot of people don't know there's different types. That's so funny. Just my aide the other day, I was telling her, she was like, wait, I didn't know there was different types. So my type, for instance, is called limb girdle muscular dystrophy. That affects pretty much my neck all the way down to my feet. So like for instance, as you can probably see now, like my neck, like I don't even have like it can really like not hold up all the way. Like it kind of like needs like a push, for instance. And that's something that it has progressed over time. The neurologist did say, she was like, Keisha, it is gonna progress. You will probably eventually be in a wheelchair. And and it happened. But that's something again, what Google told me. But it's like you kind of never know. And with limb girdle, with different types, my type also affects my heart. So once a month, once a year, I have to get an echocardiogram. And then again with muscular dystrophy, it goes to different types, and then it goes into different subtypes. So it's very confusing. For instance, my subtype is unknown. They don't even know my subtype. So because they don't know my subtype, I am unable to enter, say, any clinical trials that may occur to try to cure limb girdle muscular dystrophy. So I thought that was interesting. And we have done several testings out here with my neurologist at Brigham and Women's in Boston, and they all have came back inconclusive. So me and my neurologist have a deal. We was like, if we eventually find the subtype of you, he was like, we're gonna name it after Girls Chronically Rock. So I was like, Dale. I was like, all right. So, and he's really awesome. He's one of those doctors that he just makes me feel hopeful. And so I was like, all right, Dale, let's do it. But a lot of people don't know it narrows down to so many. There's Duchenne muscular dystrophy, there's SMA, and then a lot of people get confused with MS, multiple sclerosis, because those are two different things. And I feel like MS is more talked about. So me, yes, I know some people may like mistakenly be like, oh, MS, and then I'd be like, oh, muscular dystrophy, no big deal. But just an FYI for others, there's some people that have muscular dystrophy that do not like it when you tell them they have MS. Why? I don't know. It could be an innocent mistake. But I had this girl in my support group. She like broke down the different between the two. Like she was like, we don't have that. So just an FYI, some people do not like it when you get them mistaken. But I can understand where it's similar. Like at the end of the day, I can relate to someone with MS opposed to like say someone able-bodied. But it's kind of like those diseases where it kind of like deteriorates. We don't have any control over it. I tell people, I'm like, this is not something where I can wake up and say, hey, muscular dystrophy, can you come back tomorrow? No, that's not what works. I wake up each and every morning and this tells me what it wants to do. And I take it each day at a time. I'm not sure what the body is going to feel like. Some days my age do come in the morning and I'm like, oh, my body, I feel so tired. And I really don't even know if have the energy to get out of bed right now. So it's like each day I take it at a time, but that's what it is. It's like we don't have no control over it. We didn't ask for it, but it is what it is. But I am now happy to be a part of the awesome disability community because I love having this support and having that group I can go to and vent to because they get it. They know what it's like dealing with AIDS, dealing with doctors and all this stuff. So, I'm glad I have them for support.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing so much of that. And yeah, thanks for those action steps too, because every time I go to a place now, a public place, I'm like, let me see what their accessibility situation.
Right. You see, like the things you want to think about.
Yeah, and I remember many years ago I was running like a women's poetry group, and I remember we used to always, I mean, we had an eye for making sure we were in accessible spaces. And I remember one time one of my friends shared with me, she was like, Ray, you're having the event this week at a place that doesn't have a wheelchair ramp or an elevator. And I was like, oh my goodness, I like I didn't intend to exclude you. And so we changed because I definitely wanted to make sure that she was a part of the space. And so it was at that point where I learned, I'm like, whoa, I gotta like really be intentional about making sure that I make the space accessible whenever I'm doing an event.
Yeah, it's a huge eye opener. And I feel like it even opened my friends and family around me now when, they invite me out or go to a restaurant. They're like, oh, Keisha, we already called, in advance. They do have an elevator that's accessible. And I appreciate that, because I'm like, they're taking the initiative. They understand now this is the life living with a disability in a wheelchair. I got to call in advance, it's sad to say to make sure that this place is accessible. So yes, definitely an eye opener where it's like, open people around me eyes. So now like you'll be aware, like, oh, let me call in advance, make sure this is accessible. Doesn't have the elevator. And another thing I find bizarre is when you may call a place, like one day I went to go get a tattoo and I was like, oh, I called. I was like, are you wheelchair accessible? Oh, yeah, you come on in. We have a ramp. I get there. They do not have a ramp. it's this big, thick step. I'm like, so how is this going to work? He says, oh, we have a portable ramp, but it's broken. Now, what was the point of that? You just wasted my time. We drove 30 minutes to get here. So I noticed some places don't really know what accessible means and wheelchair accessible. So you have to be very specific with that. That's another point I realized. I'm like, same thing with hotels, another thing. I'm like, is it wheelchair accessible? Yes. So I get to the hotel room, but it's still that step. It's a walk-in shower. No, I need like the roll in. So I noticed those things. Now I got to be specific. So now I'm like kind of a professional, but it took some time to get used to because I'm like, oh, what my term may say, some people may not understand what I mean. So it's like you got to be specific with certain places.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, we had somebody in the chat ask, do you get the well-meaning folks touching your chair without permission?
So some people do, or like another my friend says some people touch their head, and then another girl of mine says that some people just like hand her money, and I'm like, I never got handed money. I would love that, honestly.
Handed money. Oh wow.
I was like, really? But yeah, some people have just be like, hi, or some people may be like, oh, we're praying for you, and but it's just kind of like I just think like people they don't know, like I don't know, they just don't have the brain, like if that makes sense.
Well, that makes sense. And I think that there's some perceptions, I think, or some misconceptions about disability too, because there are those folks who are visible and then there are also invisible disabilities. And so I think that we have to be aware of all of them. Like there's a full spectrum of the disability community, and some folks' disabilities are visible and others aren't. And so I definitely think there's a lot more conversation that needs to happen around that, and folks
Yeah.
navigate the nuances of that as well. And so we're almost at time here, Keisha. We had
Oh,
we went through a whole lot of stuff. You answered a lot of the
I
questions
know the time went by fast. No way.
that need to be given. And so where can we find you? How can we get in tune with GCR, your clothing line, and then also the Adaptive Project? And where can we find you on the socials? I know we've had you on lives before, and we definitely will be working with you. Again, this is a
Yeah.
part of a series that we're doing with Keisha. So this is part one. She'll be coming
Yes.
next year. But where can we find you, and how can we support you in all of the things that you got going on?
Yes, you can definitely check out my website at girlschronicallyrock.com. I am also on social media, Girls Chronically Rock Clothing, and then my personal page, owner of Girls Chronically Rock. And then I think I'm also on Twitter, Girls Chronically Rock as well. And then for my GCR Adaptive Project, for my nonprofit that I'm working with universities to start creating adaptive fashion with these students, that is the GCRAdaptiveP.org. So please feel free to check that out. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions about anything on my site, please let me know. And I'm always on my phone. So, and I'm also on TikTok a lot. So if you have TikTok, let me know because I love watching videos.
That's for sure. I'll definitely be linking with you tonight.
Yeah.
And last words of wisdom, encouragement, inspiration you want to share with folks before we close?
I would say for me, like I always say, like you never know what someone's dealing with, as I always like to, repeat. You never know someone's story. I always like to say too, if you have an idea, if you have a vision, just go for it, just do it, connect, network, ask those questions and just go for it. And you can do anything you want to do.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I say we are deeply grateful for you being in community with us today. I know that we'll be supporting all of the endeavors you have and manifesting some things for you too. And
Thank you.
so proud to have you up as a part of the Red, Wine, and Blue community. And we're excited about collaborating with you. And we are deeply grateful for your presence this evening. So thank you for giving us your time and energy.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast. The time went by so fast. Thank
No,
you, guys.
we can talk for hours. I know you could go on and on and on, but thank you everyone
Right.
for joining us. And we will see you all later this week. We have a lot of events on the horizon, so we'll see y'all on the internet next time.